pauses a lower court decision that blocked the Biden administration's efforts to regulate these ghost guns.
Such as President Joe Biden, who are looking for stronger regulations on these so-called ghost guns.
Judge in Texas that nullified the Biden administration's regulation on ghost gun kits, which make firearms untraceable.
The problem is that the Second Amendment is pretty clear. We can argue over whether the court interprets it properly.
In issuing those regulations last year, saying the guns are a major threat to public safety.
Administration effort to regulate ghost guns for now. The court voted 5-4 to put a ruling on hold from a
Supreme Court ATF. The recent development in the Vanderstock frames and receivers case, where the ATF has filed for Supreme Court review, marks a significant milestone in the ongoing battle over 80% arm restrictions. This move by the ATF comes after the First Circuit handed down its decision on a summary judgment, pushing the case to the forefront of legal scrutiny. The ATF's decision to seek Supreme Court review follows the procedural posture of the case and lower court decisions, ultimately forcing their hand in this matter. This move was anticipated by legal observers, highlighting the critical nature of the case's implications for Second Amendment rights. The ATF's hope for a favorable outcome rests on recent emergency stays granted by the Supreme Court in their favor. However, this optimism may be misplaced, as the complexities of the case and its broader implications suggests a more nuanced outcome. To understand the gravity of this case, it's essential to revisit its origins and the events leading up to its current status. Initially, the plaintiffs sought preliminary injunctions against the ATF's new rule on unfinished frames and receivers, arguing that it exceeded the agency's regulatory authority. Judge Reed O'Connor granted a limited preliminary injunction, halting the enforcement of the rule against specific companies and their customers. Subsequent interventions by other companies, such as Black Hawk Manufacturing Group and Defense Distributed, resulted in additional preliminary injunctions protecting their interests. However, the pivotal moment came when Judge O'Connor granted a motion for summary judgment, vacating the entire frames and receivers rule nationwide. This comprehensive victory for the plaintiffs struck down the rule entirely, prompting the ATF to seek review. The ATF's appeal to the Fifth Circuit, accompanied by a request for a temporary stay of the vacator, was met with resistance. The Fifth Circuit declined to rule in their favor, prompting the ATF to escalate the matter to the Supreme Court on an emergency basis. The sequence of events underscores the high stakes involved in the case and the urgency with which it is being addressed. The ATF's attempt to overturn the vacator of the frames and receivers rule reflects their determination to assert regulatory authority over unfinished arm components. However, the legal landscape surrounding Second Amendment rights is complex, and the outcome of this case is far from certain. While the ATF may seek validation from recent emergency stays, the Supreme Court's decision will hinge on a careful examination of statutory interpretation and constitutional principles. ATF Supreme Court Review. In this case, the ATF sought an emergency stay from the Supreme Court after Judge O'Connor vacated the frames and receivers rule nationwide. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, granted the ATF's request, with Justice Barrett and Roberts joining the majority. This stay prevented the nationwide vacator from fully going into effect while the appeal was being reviewed by the Fifth Circuit. Following the Supreme Court's decision, 80% Arms and Defense Distributed requested Judge O'Connor to reinstate the prior limited preliminary injunctions. They argued that the emergency stay only prevented a nationwide vacator, but did not prohibit Judge O'Connor from maintaining his earlier limited injunctions. Judge O'Connor granted the emergency motion for a new preliminary injunction, reinstating the limited protections for the companies and their customers. Unsatisfied with Judge O'Connor's decision, the ATF appealed to the Fifth Circuit, accusing him of defying the Supreme Court's emergency order. However, the Fifth Circuit rejected the ATF's request to strike down the new limited injunction, Nevertheless, the ATF persisted and filed a second emergency application to the Supreme Court.
Pauses a lower court decision that blocked the Biden administration's efforts to regulate these ghost guns.
A divided Supreme Court today allowing the Biden administration to continue enforcing regulations on ghost guns.
It does function, and it is an ultra-hazardous instrumentality that can be used to kill someone.
Administration effort to regulate ghost guns for now. The court voted 5-4 to put a ruling on hold from
seeking to vacate the new injunction. The Supreme Court sided with the ATF again, prohibiting any new relief until the case returned to the Supreme Court for a final decision. Meanwhile, the Fifth Circuit reviewed the case on its merits and partially upheld Judge O'Connor's decision to strike down the ATF's rule. The three-judge panel agreed that the rule was invalid, but found the nationwide vacator overly broad. As a result, they remanded the case to Judge O'Connor to reconsider a more limited scope of relief. Following the Fifth Circuit's decision, the ATF had several options. They could have pursued en banc review by the Fifth Circuit, but given their track record, this was unlikely to be successful. Instead, they awaited the Fifth Circuit's mandate and prepared for the next steps in the litigation. Ghost guns. The ATF's battle over the regulation of unfinished frames and receivers, commonly known as ghost guns, has taken a significant turn with the recent filing for Supreme Court review. This move follows a series of legal maneuvers and decisions that have escalated the case to the highest judicial level in the United States. Initially, the ATF faced challenges from various firearm manufacturers and distributors seeking to halt the enforcement of new rules targeting unfinished gun parts. The case's journey to the Supreme Court underscores the stakes involved in the regulation of ghost guns. The ATF's arguments have centered on public safety concerns, emphasizing the potential for untraceable arms to fall into the hands of criminals and prohibited individuals. However, critics contend that the ATF's regulations exceed its statutory authority and infringe on Second Amendment rights,
such as President Joe Biden, who are looking for stronger regulations on these so-called ghost guns.
Because they're easily available on the internet and hard for law enforcement to track.
For the Biden administration as it works to crack down on ghost guns. These kits, they can be purchased online.
This all hinges on the definition of firearm, and back in 2022, it was the ATF because of this frustration.
The Supreme Court's upcoming review is significant not only for the specific issue of ghost guns, but also for broader questions regarding administrative law and regulatory authority. The court's decision could have far-reaching implications for the balance of power between federal agencies and the judiciary. Predictions about the court's eventual ruling vary. Some believe that the court may uphold the ATF's regulations, citing public safety imperatives and deference to agency expertise. Others anticipate a more limited decision, invalidating the regulations on procedural grounds or questioning the ATF's statutory authority. Supreme Court upholds ghost guns. The recent Supreme Court decision to temporarily revive the Biden administration's regulation of ghost guns marks a significant development in the ongoing debate over gun control in the United States. The regulation, issued by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, aimed to address the proliferation of untraceable homemade firearms assembled from kits purchased online. The court's order, issued by a 5-4 vote, provisionally allowed the regulation to remain in effect while legal challenges against it proceed through the courts. The ATF's regulation, issued in 2022, expanded the definition of firearm under the Gun Control Act of 1968, requiring manufacturers and sellers of arm kits and components to obtain licenses, mark their products with serial numbers, and conduct background checks. However, opponents of the regulation, including arm owners, advocacy groups, and companies involved in the sale of arm kits, challenge its legality, arguing that it exceeds the ATF's authority and was not authorized by existing law. The legal battle over the regulation began when Judge Reed O'Connor of the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Texas struck down the regulation in July.
In issuing those regulations last year, saying the guns are a major threat to public safety.
People are allowed to build at home basically a downloadable, anonymous, untraceable firearm.
The Supreme Court has decided for now that the Biden administration's crackdown on so-called ghost guns will stand.
Judge in Texas that nullified the Biden administration's regulation on ghost gun kits, which make firearms untraceable.
The problem is that the Second Amendment is pretty clear. We can argue over whether the court interprets it properly,
ruling that the ATF's interpretation of the law was incorrect. He held that arm kits and components did not fall within the definition of firearm as outlined in the Gun Control Act of 1968. Following Judge O'Connor's ruling, the case proceeded to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, where a three-judge panel refused to stay key aspects of the lower court's decision. Subsequently, the Biden administration sought emergency relief from the Supreme Court, leading to the recent 5-4 vote in favor of temporarily reinstating the regulation. The Supreme Court's decision to revive the regulation underscores the complexity and contentiousness of the issue of arm control in the United States, while proponents argue that such measures are necessary to address the proliferation of untraceable arms and combat armed violence. Opponents contend that they infringe upon Second Amendment rights and are ineffective in achieving their intended goals. Moving forward, the fate of the ATF's regulation of ghost arms remains uncertain, as legal challenges against it continue to unfold in the courts. The Supreme Court's decision to temporarily uphold the regulation while these challenges proceed reflects the significance of the issue and the need for further judicial review and interpretation. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.